What is up, Steelers Nation? Thank you so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. I'm Noah Strackbine, joined by my main man, Steven Thompson. Find us on youtube.com/All Steelers Talkers. Subscribe anywhere you get your podcast. The Pittsburgh Steelers, well, they've waited a long time, and it is officially here. It is draft week, the 2024 NFL Draft. The first round pick will begin Thursday, I believe 8 p.m. And the Steelers are set to pick, I don't know, roughly a little bit before midnight. We have gone through.
Yeah, that's generous. I was gonna say how long before midnight? Like, because there's always like, oh, it starts at 8, but then there's like a half hour lead up, and then the Bears are gonna take 20 minutes to pick the guy that we know that they're gonna pick, and then it'll go from there. It's this stuff always just drags out so much longer than it needs to be.
Yes, it is. If you're picking last in this draft and you don't know what's going to happen, I mean, the Steelers are a prime example here that we have no idea what direction they're going to go in, but we are going to wait it out and see. And by the time they're set to pick, it might be midnight, a little bit past. It might be Friday morning. Who knows? But they're ready. We have gone through every scenario. We have broke down every mock draft. We have talked about seemingly every trade, and it has brought us to this point, the week of the 2024 NFL Draft. And today, I think we got something special for you guys. We spent the weekend. We dove into every name that the Pittsburgh Steelers could possibly look at in the first 3 rounds of the NFL Draft. Because, quite frankly, after round 3, everything is a mystery. You have no idea who's going to be there. You have no idea what names are going to go early or later, or what is going to arise within those first 4 rounds of the NFL Draft. But the first 3 picks, the first 3 rounds, you could kind of take a crack at it. And we have come to a conclusion of our draft board, our Pittsburgh Steelers draft board. The guys that they should draft, the guys that they might have to reach to draft, and the guys that they could look to fall back and draft a bit later in each round. It's an exciting day. How you feeling, my friend? It's draft week. There's a little bit of juice in the air this week, I think.
It is exciting. This is like the first real football event to happen in more than a month. Even then it's only, muted football, but I'm really excited. Sun is out, birds are chirping, air feels clear. There's a lot to look forward to this weekend. And just like after spending, you spend 2 months or whatever building to this weekend, and then it's all gone in the blink of an eye. So you got to be ready to take the bull by the horns when it's right in front of you.
Yeah, 100%. It is. Everything that you've built up to will either come right or become wrong on Thursday night, and every guess that you could have possibly made, every report that you could have read it's either going to come true or it's going to just float into the wind and turn into nothing. And it's an exciting week. We will head there on Thursday, dive into first round pick, hear what we're hearing inside the facility. Today, I will head to UPMC Rooney Sports Complex in the South Side to talk to Omar Khan and Mike Tomlin, and we don't really expect much to come out of a pre-draft press conference, but maybe you get a little bit of a tidbit here, a little bit of a tidbit there on where the Steelers are kind of looking in those first couple of rounds. Before we dive into our draft board, you dropped your first mock draft of the season today. You have the Steelers sticking with the familiar face at pick number 20, Graham Barton out of Duke, and then they get a little interesting. Pick 2, Roman Wilson out of Michigan, and then you have him double dipping a couple of times here at 2 different positions. Mason Smith goes round 3, followed by Andrew Phillips, a personal favorite of mine, but they also double dip at corner with Al Blades Jr. out of Duke in the 6th round, and then Joseph Cephas, wide receiver out of UTSA, in the 6th round as well. Talk us through your mock draft, what you were thinking here on all these picks.
Yeah, so I started with Barton, and if you watch last week's episode, if you listen to last week's episode, I was a big proponent of trading down, trying to get some value, stockpile some picks. I tried to do that. I ran through the scenarios. I kept trying to find ways that I could trade back, with the Bills, with the Cowboys, even once with the Cardinals as well. You end up not getting a center. You don't end up getting one of those top guys, Barton or Zach Frazier in the first, or not Zach Frazier, excuse me, Jackson Powers Johnson in the first round if you trade back. And, that just leaves you some real limited options. Then you got to hope that Zach Frazier falls to you, and that seems less likely by the day. And then you're left with like a Cedric Van Pran or something if you're not able to nab Frazier. So I thought it's too much of a headache and too much of a risk to finish this draft without a center. So that's why I went Barton in the first round. You got to lock it up as soon as possible. I thought kind of along the same lines at wide receiver, and that's why Wilson was my second round pick. It's a little bit of a reach, I think, but I think a necessary one that the Steelers have to go with, just because you need someone who I think can play for you right away. And I think Wilson, just because of his age, he's a really impressive athlete. He's got great speed. I think that'll all translate pretty quickly. So I think that he'll be able to make some plays and make some big plays for the Steelers right away. That's why he was round 2. And then Mason Smith, another reach in the third round, but I thought someone that's too athletic and too talented and just too big at a position in need for them to really pass up.
Yeah. Yeah. I like all three of those picks. Roman Wilson's a dude that I think at the beginning of this was so high on everybody's radar, kind of fell off. I like that you stuck around with the guy that's familiar. I think that in all of this, over months of talking about the same guys, people try to get creative and kind of, hey, you got to change this. Well, we've talked about this for too long. Let's go in a different direction here. And in that, I think the guys that make the most sense on day one kind of get lost. And I like that you stuck with, look, at Roman Wilson was a dude that Mike Tomlin loved at the Senior Bowl,
right?
That they spent time scouting at the pro day, and he's just a guy that makes a lot of sense for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I like that. And then I like that you go, I mean, I don't think it's a reach for Mason Smith in round 3. I think that if he's there, he's going to turn out to be much more than his draft stock says. I believe Mason Smith is a dude that could be in the NFL for a long time and make a lot of noise. And then I love your second, third round pick in Andrew Phillips. Graham Barton is obviously the name to watch right now, and I think me and you have kind of come to the conclusion that if you had to put your money on it today, he's right. The Steelers' first round pick.
Right. I feel like he is the right combination of definitely going to be there. I can't see anyone really reaching for him beyond before pick 20. And then, it's also he's good enough. Like, he's at a position of need, and he's probably the best prospect at that position of need. I think you can argue between him and Powers Johnson, but I think the way that reports and rumors have been kind of going, it seems like Barton is kind of the favored one among the Steelers, at least, in terms of who they sent to certain pro days, who they had in for visits and things like that, who they talked to at the combine. I feel like Barton is just the one that they like a lot more of those top 2 centers. So that's why I think he ends up being the guy that they take at that position. And I mean, if Barton's not there, I'd be pretty confident saying it's one of those top 2 centers. It's either him or Powers Johnson. I don't think they're going away from offensive line and specifically the center position at pick 20.
Yeah, me neither. I think the only way that something changes that is if a guy falls, if they see a guy like Fayuga fall, or Troy Fatanu fall, or somebody like that. But if it's Mims, if it's Tyler Guyton, if it's, I don't know, the dude out of Arizona that's sitting there at 20, I could see a center. I mean, no questions asked, it's a center. Your boy Brian Thomas got some love today, as from the Athletics, Dan Brugler, saying that he might have a ceiling of pick number 20, and I was like, well, Steven might love to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, I like Brian Thomas. I think he'd be a great pickup for the Steelers, but I just think you put yourself in too sticky of a situation if you go receiver, or if a corner falls to you that you like if you go with, I mean, let's be honest, those are luxury picks at this point. You're not, I think center is the most dire need that they have. And I'm looking through as soon as I started to trade back in those scenarios, I was like, well, shoot, now I got to pull up free agent center options right now. And those things are, the free agent center market is pretty thin right now in terms of both affordable and, kind of starting quality options. So I just think you leave yourself not enough room to make all the other moves that you got to make if you don't go center in the first round.
I agree. I think that you could trust Dan Moore. I think that you could test out Spencer Anderson. I think that maybe you can make a trade. I don't know how you go about it, but I think that a center in the first round is by far the solution to the most problems with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and is the easiest fix with the highest amount of ceiling. And I think it makes all the sense in the world when it comes to the Steelers' first round pick. That's a good transition into our big board. So we spent the weekend, as I've said, diving into everybody. And we were on a call, me, you, Nick, talking about, okay, what about this guy? I don't know about this guy. This might be a fall. Let's put him here. Can we put guys in two different spots? Yeah, probably. It was a lot of debate. And I think that's the best part about this is we came to a conclusion with three categories for each round. The first, the second, and the third round of the if they're there guys. These guys will not be passed up by the Pittsburgh Steelers. If they are available at 20, they are the first round pick for Pittsburgh. And then this is the big board. This is who the Steelers are hoping fall to them at pick number 20, pick number 51, pick number 84, pick number 98. And then the fallback options. Okay, these guys are there. You could add them right now, or you could consider kind of moving back and seeing if they're there in a couple of picks, kind of boosting your amount of picks that you have in the NFL draft. And I think those three categories allow us to do a lot of things and allow us to envision the Steelers draft in a deeper sense. And at this point, where we are a week from, or less than a week, 4 days from round one, I think it's a good place to be. So let's start with round one, pick 20. If they're there, if this is they cannot pass them up. If they are on the board, we fully believe that there is no chance the Steelers will avoid these guys and potentially think about trading up to go and get them, depending on how close they get to pick number 20. Those names: Quinion Mitchell, cornerback out of Toledo, a name that we have talked about vigorously on this show about how much the Steelers love him. Talise Fuaga, offensive tackle out of Oregon State. Rome Odunze, wide receiver out of Washington, that as early as or as late as over the weekend, Mina Kimes says the Steelers might be a name to watch if he falls out of the top 10. Cornerback out of Alabama, Terrion Arnold, a sleeper, I think. A guy that the Steelers love, that Ike Taylor has raved about, that should be pretty high on the Steelers draft board. And then maybe my personal favorite, a guy that people are talking about maybe being the first defensive lineman out of the first round at this point, which is a huge climb compared to possibly falling to the Steelers like last Thursday. Byron Murphy, defensive tackle out of Texas. You look at that list, you see those names: Quinion Mitchell, Talise Fuaga, Rome Odunze, Terrion Arnold, and Byron Murphy. What are your thoughts, my friend? You helped develop it, so let's talk about it.
My thoughts is that, man, Rome Odunze would be fun, you know? Like, that's the thing. It's just all these guys would just be so much fun. And,
Yes.
you know, like I went with Barton just because I felt like it was the smartest, you know, most prudent.
Yeah.
Like, you're not, I don't know, it would be it'd be a big reach to go anywhere other than center. But like, you look at this list of names and you're like, man, like Quinion Mitchell and Joey Porter, that'd be awesome.
Oh,
Quinion Mitchell, or, you know, Joey Porter and Terrion Arnold, that'd be awesome. George Pickens and Odunze, like, they would just be so much fun here. But I mean, I think the better thing for me is that none of these guys are really going to fall to them. So I don't have to like tie myself in the knots thinking about, man, is it too much to reach for this guy? Is it too much? You know, like I still think center is always going to be the smartest option for them, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't interested in seeing Rome Odunze and George Pickens pair up together.
Yeah, I agree. I think everybody on this list is man, you really consider it if they're sitting there at 15. Like at some point, these are, Graham Barton's great. Yeah, Armarius Mims is good. Yeah, Troy Fatanu is awesome. Like, you could talk yourself into all those guys and feel really comfortable with all of them. This list is if they're there close enough, like, they're a game changer. You might have just landed potentially the best player in the draft. Like, that's how good every single one of these guys could be, that they're really up there. Let me ask, who do you think's the most realistic to fall to them? And who do you think is the most realistic that they would consider a trade up for?
That's interesting because I don't know. I feel like Murphy is the one most likely to fall to them. Like you said, he's had such a fluctuating, you know, draft position, and as we've seen over this draft season. So I feel like he's the one most likely to fall out of that, you know, kind of top 15 or top 10, whatever range he's in right now. With that said, I feel like it's either Fuaga or Mitchell, the most likely ones that they would trade up for. And I'm tempted to say Mitchell, just because at corner, like the drop off between Mitchell and a Nate Wiggins, you know, someone who's actually going to be in that range that the Steelers could pick in, I think is so drastic. Whereas with Fuaga, like, you might be able to get a Troy Fatanu or a JC Latham at 20.
Yep.
You don't necessarily need to reach for a top 15 pick, or you don't need to reach for the fourth tackle in this draft, when the gap between them and the fifth or the sixth one or the seventh one is not nearly as big as it is with the corners. So
Yeah.
that's why I think Mitchell is the one that they'd most likely be willing to reach up for.
I think depending on Quinion Mitchell and where he falls, I agree with that 100%. I'm like almost convinced that, like, remember when Devin Witherspoon last year, like at one point was considered like a mid first round pick, and then the last like week of the draft, it was like, now this guy might go like top 5, and then he goes 6, and you're like, yeah, doesn't surprise me. I think Quinion Mitchell might be in that like category, like where the first team that needs a defensive player is just going to be like, yep, nope, we're going Quinion Mitchell, 0 questions asked, and he turns into a top 10 pick. Like, I really think that that's an option for him. If he falls to anywhere near 15, 14, 13 might be pushing it, but he may be. I think the Steelers are at least making phone calls to see how far up they can move. When it comes to the most realistic to fall to them, if you asked me 24 hours ago, I would believe you with Byron Murphy. Now, I mean, even Schefter's saying like the guy might be the first pick in the draft, or the first defensive player in the draft. And I'm like, okay, well, I got to go off of the most recent reports, and the most recent reports say that my hopes and dreams went out the window 24 hours ago. If only we recorded this a day early. So I'm going to go most likely to fall to them might be Terrion Arnold. And I still don't feel confident in that, but I might say Terrion Arnold, just depending on, kind of how the corners fall in this draft. And maybe guys are just like, yeah, we're just going to, if Cooper DeJean, let's say that, I think a team could go Cooper DeJean over Terrion Arnold, leaving the door open for the Pittsburgh Steelers to land Arnold at pick number 20. Name to watch to trade up for. I mean, Quinion Mitchell's my favorite, but I think Fuaga and Odunze, real options there. I think Odunze is a sleeper if he makes it to 15.
Odunze is crazy. Like, I don't know. Like, he seems like more like top 10, than.
Oh, I think he might be the best wide receiver outside of Marvin Harrison Jr. I think he might be the second best wide receiver in the draft, and a draft that the top 3 wide receivers
are incredible.
Yeah, like they might all turn out to be the top 3 wide receivers in the NFL in 2 years. Like they might just be that good. I agree with you. I just don't know. I don't know where they're going to go. Like I don't know how many teams are looking for a wide receiver that early, especially with how stacked all of these positions are, that I think the top half of the draft is so loaded that it's tough. So I think if he goes to 15, I mean, I just think at least Omar's going to call and be like, hey, Indy, I don't know who has the 15th pick. I think it's the Saints.
Yeah, it's either the Saints or I want to say the Raiders, maybe. I can't.
Yeah,
remember.
Maybe the Raiders. But it's one of those, and I think Omar's on the phone just saying like, hey, let's see what could happen.
That's just like trading up, more than 5 spots for a receiver is just, I know, something that like Omar Khan would get killed for it. Just like draft Twitter and everything. Like, no, I don't think anyone would feel so, like people would either love it or they would think it's the stupidest thing anyone's ever done in the NFL.
Yeah, I agree. But depending on, could you imagine if he pulls off of like, hey, here's a 4th round pick. We're just moving up 5 spots. And I think like of all the GMs, the con artist might be able to get it done. And then at that point, it's like whatever.
Yeah, and if you like tell the Saints or whatever, I think the Saints like are looking at tackles and offensive linemen. If you say, don't worry, we're not taking your guy.
Yeah,
your guy's still going to be there. Just let me slide in and grab this receiver right here. It doesn't make any difference to you.
That's what I'm saying. And then he's there. And then boom, Roma Dunze. Oh my gosh, Roma Dunze and George Pickens would be crazy, absolutely crazy. All right, let's talk realistic pick for the big board. Pick number 20. Our list includes a lot of offensive linemen. Troy Fatanu out of Washington, JC Latham, offensive tackle out of Alabama, a name that is heating up as we get closer. Our personal favorite, Graham Barton, center out of Duke. Cooper DeJean, cornerback, or I guess defensive back out of Iowa, and then center out of Oregon. Jackson Powers Johnson. I think there's an overall consensus here that the Pittsburgh Steelers most likely are going to take an offensive lineman with pick number 20.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if you're not going to go center, then you almost have to go offensive tackle. I mean, there are just too many holes on this offensive line. This offensive line has been kind of, I don't want to say middling, but there's just clearly the talent level has been lacking a little bit for a while, and there are just still too many holes for them to not fill somehow.
Yep.
Whether it's with the tackle or it's with the center. That's why we have so many names listed at those positions. I'm partial to center. I just don't think like there's a viable center option on this roster, but I can't tell you that I'd be upset with Fatanu or Latham, to be quite honest with you. Uh, DeJean has kind of fallen off of my board. I think I like as far as 20th. I like not because he's bad or not because I have any different kind of evaluation of him. It's just I don't know if they can afford to pick a corner at this spot.
Yeah, I would love Cooper DeJean. I think Cooper DeJean is a game changer, but I think that I somewhat agree with you that if you don't make a move up in the second round, and maybe that's their thought, I would say if they select a corner, there's a game plan to make a move in the second round. That most likely they're saying we're not sticking around at 51, that we're going to move up. And I think DeJean may be it, but I think that if all these names are there at 20, DeJean is probably last on that list, depending on how you look at, and we would imagine Barton sits over Jackson Powers Johnson on their big board, but I would say DeJean is probably last on that list. And I mean, I think we both have the same answer here, but most realistic option, probably Graham Barton.
Yeah, definitely. Like probably most realistic. Like Fatanu and Latham both seem like they're going to go before him. Powers Johnson seems like a bit of a reach, and same for DeJean. So
yeah,
leaves us with one guy.
One guy, Graham Barton, former offensive tackle, short arms, playing center in the NFL. Love it. And then the fallback options. These guys might be here at 20, and maybe you feel comfortable taking them at 20. Maybe you feel comfortable enough that you're saying, all right, let's move back a couple of spots, make a trade, add some draft value later in the NFL draft, and grab one of these guys. These are some interesting names as well. Texas wide receiver Adonai Mitchell, Georgia offensive tackle Armarius Mims, Tyler Guyton, offensive tackle out of Oklahoma, Nate Wiggins, another cornerback out of Clemson, and a sleeper, I think, a big name to watch, most certainly, Ladd McConkey, wide receiver out of Georgia. Steven, who's your favorite on this list? Who is a guy that if you were the Steelers, you wouldn't even think about moving back? You're saying, hey, I might feel comfortable enough picking him at 20.
Yeah, I think it's Adonai Mitchell, to be quite honest with you. I do love me some Ladd McConkey. It was fun watching some of his highlights and reading into him a little bit over the weekend. But Mitchell just has a kind of speed and athleticism, and he has this huge frame that I feel like the Steelers would absolutely love. I feel like he's got the higher ceiling than McConkey, even if McConkey might, probably be ready to contribute right away. I think a little bit sooner. And then just I don't know, both those tackles just seem like crapshoots. Like I have no idea what they're gonna bring, and I've cooled very much on Nate Wiggins since earlier in the draft season. The size does concern me a little bit, and the weight. So I'd say AD Mitchell out of all those three. I think it's just also interesting because these guys are like you kind of alluded to, like these are trade back options as well.
Yeah.
Like if they end up trading back, these are the guys who would be kind of your 24th, 27th, 28th pick kind of big board guys, I think.
Yeah. So my name to watch would be Armarius Mims, but I think that where the Steelers sit, whereas if they trade back and he's still there, I think that's a realistic option. And I think maybe he's realistic at 20, but I kind of look at it like they have not taken chances in this NFL offseason. They have looked at this and said, we're going to win a Super Bowl and we're going to hunt for a Super Bowl and we're going to make all the moves that are necessary to put ourselves in position to win a Super Bowl. And I mean, Mims is a guy he's a question mark. He could turn into something great, and maybe you get a incredible pick with pick number 20, a guy that should have went well beforehand. But maybe you get a guy that only played 8 games in college and just can't stay healthy and has some issues, and because of that, he doesn't turn out to be anything crazy, and you wasted your first-round pick on an offensive tackle. I think if I'm sitting at 25, I feel a lot better about Armarius Mims than I do at 20. If they're sitting there at 20 and all of everybody else is gone except for these 5 names, I agree with you. I think Mitchell's the guy. I think maybe they'd consider McConkey, but I would say Mitchell's the name that the Steelers would say, look, we want a guy who's gonna work out in the NFL, and this guy's gonna work out in the NFL. There are no questions asked. We'll figure the rest out later. and I would see him being an actual option at 20 if all of the rest of the names are gone. But I would agree with you. I think Mitchell's the name that stands out the most on this list. Mims is the name that if you fall back, that's an option. I think Guyton's on that list too. I don't know how much. I mean, they brought him in for a visit. I think they're just kind of doing their due diligence. I don't see Guyton as like a real, this is definitely going to happen for the Steelers, especially at pick number 20.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem like much of anyone is very excited, terribly excited about Guyton. Like, not even,
No.
doesn't even seem like the people who are within range to take him like at the way end of that first round seem super thrilled that that's the tackle that's going to fall to him.
Yeah, I agree. All right, heading into the second round here, things get very interesting. If they're there, these are the guys. Number 1, Zach Frazier, center out of West Virginia. Name that, I mean, you go back 2.5 weeks ago, this guy is probably a fringe second-round pick. Steelers got a really good shot at 51. You talk about it today, the Steelers might not have a shot at 20. Steelers could look at this and say, oh, we don't even get it. Second center's already off the board. That's how crazy this guy is. He is Mel Kiper's number 2 center. Mel Kiper says there's no chance he's going to go outside of the top 50. But if he's there, Zach Frazier is a name to watch for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Second, cornerback out of Rutgers, Max Melton. This is a personal favorite of mine. This dude is a stud, and I think he's going to be unbelievable in the NFL. Wide receiver out of South Carolina, Xavier Legette, a name that I think is a sleeper when it comes to the Steelers' second-round pick and a name that the Steelers could have a lot of interest in. Defensive tackle out of Florida State, Braden Fisk, who, again, 2 months ago, you go to the NFL Combine, this guy's a third-round pick. Now you're looking at him as a potential mid-second-round pick out of Florida State. And then Jordan Morgan, offensive tackle out of Arizona, guy who could go in the first round, but it kind of depends on how everything else falls. You look at this board, I think obviously Zach Frazier highlights it, but who else on this list really entices you?
Yeah, I would say Melton, kind of obvious because he's kind of our second guy in this group. But I like, if they go the way that I think they're going to go, Frazier's not even going to be a consideration. Not only because he won't be there, but because they're already going to have a center. So I think they're going to kind of look past Frazier a little bit, depending on how they go in that first round. And I think Melton, I think corner is kind of your second, or it's arguably your third biggest need. But I think Melton, like you said, it's one of your favorites. But I think a guy who's going to rise quickly, and I think it's a guy who's, if he's at 51, it's not making it much past 51. So if you want him, if you want a good corner that you can trust and one that has some NFL ready capabilities, I'd go with Melton.
Yeah, I think what excites me about Melton is this guy could play inside, he could play outside immediately. You could look at him and say he is a starter, whether we move Dante Jackson inside or they keep Melton in the inside and keep Jackson on the outside. I just think he provides instant starter capabilities for the Pittsburgh Steelers and a name that is going to grow into something crazy. Like, I have such high hopes for Max Melton. It's wild. I would go Max Melton over Nate Wiggins, if we're going to be honest. If somebody said pick a corner in the NFL draft, I'm going Max Melton over Nate Wiggins. Zach Frazier, obviously. Xavier Legette is a name that I think if he's there, the Steelers could consider, hey, this dude might just be too special at 51. If this wasn't such a loaded draft class, you have to go. He's probably going earlier. And I think the Steelers could view him as a second-round pick with so much upside out of South Carolina that maybe they just don't pass him up. They don't take a risk there. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I mean, I didn't have anything. I think Leggett would be a nice addition. I feel like that's your wide receiver too. I mean, anyone I think you kind of pick in this range is your day one wide receiver too. And like, it just has like such great, like, he's not exactly a George Pickens copy, but like, just imagine having two like massive 6'3", 6'4" wideouts on either side of your offense. I think Arthur Smith would really love that.
Yeah. So sticking with this is 51 realistic options on the big board, names that we could see the Steelers land if they do not move from 51. A lot of wide receivers. We have trends with each pick, and I think it's clear of what category or what position is going to be heaviest with each selection in the first 3 rounds. To highlight this list, starts it off with Ricky Pearsall, wide receiver out of Florida, a name that, I mean, a lot of excitement around that name. Malachi Corley, wide receiver out of Western Kentucky. The Pittsburgh Steelers seem to love this guy, have shown a ton of interest in Malachi Corley, plus they love their small school guys. Roman Wilson, wide receiver out of Michigan, a guy that went in the second round to you in the Steelers mock draft today. Another center, Cedric Van Pran out of Georgia, a name that I think is a sleeper on the Steelers board, but it kind of depends on where the board has fallen. And then this is a name. This is a name that is sneakily climbing up the draft board that the Steelers might consider if he is there, and that is Michigan cornerback Mike Sandristil. I definitely didn't pronounce that name right, but I've been watching him. A little 5'10 guy, could play outside, probably best suited inside. Has made a lot of noise recently, probably climbing within the first 2 rounds of the draft after being earlier in the offseason. Names on here that if you were the Steelers, obviously you're thinking Roman Wilson, but what name, if available, is the best name for the Steelers?
Yeah, obviously I think it's Wilson. I think Wilson is kind of the most reliable NFL ready guy. I think that's what they need. But I'm really interested in Sam Ristel from Michigan. You brought him up when we were going over this big board. It was kind of the first time that I had heard of him, and I think it's really impressive. I think he's got some nice tape. He's a really good athlete. And then, like you said, that inside-outside versatility. Like, I think that's something that the Steelers need in any cornerback that they draft this year, because that slot corner is an issue, but also you're looking for someone who I think could eventually move to the outside and be that long-term pair with Joey Porter Jr. So if you think Sam Rousseau can be it, I would go for that over a wide receiver, quite honestly. Like, I think if you can find a corner who can set you up for not just this year, but moving well forward, I think in my mind that's a little more valuable than a wide receiver here.
Yeah, so I agree. I think the corners that could be available at 51 might just be too good to pass up for the Steelers. That you could look at it and just say, look, if Max Melton's there, if Sam Still's there, like, these are guys that, yeah, awesome. There are a lot of good wide receivers, but there's still a lot of good wide receivers. Whereas in the corners that are available now probably aren't available in round 3, and the drop-off might be a little bit more significant. These are guys that can make an impact immediately in day 1. Now, I will say this. If we go center, if the Steelers go center in round 1, corner/wide receiver in round 2, that's no offensive tackle. Is that an okay move for the Pittsburgh Steelers?
I think they can get away with it. It's maybe not ideal, but I also think that, I don't know, tackle's a position where I think you can get away with drafting a bit of a project, someone who maybe needs a little bit of work. Like, I get it, Dan Moore's not ideal, but you've got bigger needs elsewhere, and I think you're just going to have to live with the idea that you're not going to get a tackle before the 3rd round or something like that, that you're not going to get a guy who might be starter capable right away. Like, you're going to have to be patient with it a little bit, and so that's kind of just the place that I'm in with the Steelers as far as tackles go.
Yeah, I agree. I think that if all of your guys, of all the positions of need, as crazy as it sounds, left tackle might be the one that I'm like, okay, look, if you need to, you could start Dan Moore Jr. You don't feel good about it, but if you need to, you can do it. And that's a spot to be for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Ricky Pearsall is the name on this list that really, really excites me, but I just think that that's because the upside there is wild. And I think that kid could turn into so much more than maybe his draft stock says it is, with how twitchy and good of a route runner he could possibly be. Here's some fallback options for you. Andrew Phillips, cornerback out of Kentucky. Defensive tackle Mason Smith out of LSU. Kyrie Jackson, big corner out of Oregon. Luke McCaffrey. I mean, you're talking NFL bloodlines and some real good ones. This is one. Wide receiver out of Rice, and then Devontae Walker, wide receiver out of North Carolina. Of all those, if you did not make a trade, if the Steelers sat there at 51, what would be your name of, okay, I feel the most comfortable with the Steelers selecting this name in the 2nd round?
Of all our guys or our fallback guys?
Right, fallback guys.
Oh, Mason Smith. I think Mason Smith would be. I think that's a guy that you cannot pass up. If he's the actually, I take that back. I'm going Andrew Phillips. Actually, I think he's kind of the name. Smith, I feel like they could still get in the 3rd round. Phillips, I think, is less and less likely the longer you wait, and corner's a bigger need. So I'm going with Phillips. Actually, finally.
Yes. So I agree. I think Phillips is so underrated in this draft. I think he is a stud. He does not let you catch the football. I'm a big fan of Andrew Phillips. I think he gives me, I don't know, maybe better Mike Hilton vibes, as crazy as that sounds. I think he could play inside and outside. He's a name that's going to be super physical right off of the bat, matches Joey Porter Jr.'s physicality. I like Andrew Phillips, big fan of him. Mason Smith would probably be number 2 on this list. Kyrie Jackson, I could agree with, depending on where the rest of this draft goes. If the Steelers have a plan for everywhere else and they're just like, look, at Kyrie is just a big physical guy who we're just going to see what happens. okay, if that's your one like risk in this draft, okay. I think he's a major risk, though. I'm not totally sold on him. Andrew Phillips, Mason Smith, no doubt about it. All right, heading into round 3. Picks 84 and 98, two big ones for the Pittsburgh Steelers. The if they're there category. These are big. These are names that are falling down, and some new names have made their way onto the draft board. The if they're there, probably not going to be there at 84, but if they are, you cannot pass these guys up. Defensive tackle out of LSU, Mason Smith makes the list twice. Andrew Phillips does as well, cornerback out of Kentucky. Number 3 on this list, we finally get some linebackers. Junior Colson out of Michigan, followed by Jeremiah Trotter Jr. out of Clemson, and then to round it out, Dwayne Carter, defensive tackle out of Duke. Of those names, who's the most exciting? Who's the most realistic to make their way to the Pittsburgh Steelers at, let's say, 84?
Yeah, Colson seems like the more realistic one, I would have to say. Obviously, like we went over this just now, but Smith and Phillips are kind of like your ideal targets. Those are the guys that you need. But
yeah,
I'd say Colson or Trotter. I think one of those linebackers of this group seem like the most likely to fall down to the Steelers at 84.
Yeah, I like Colson. I like Trotter. I have been against the Steelers adding an inside linebacker in this draft class just because I just don't think that they need one. Like, how many inside linebackers could you possibly have on your roster that are supposed to play roles? But if you don't know what's going on with Cole Holcomb, if you are looking at this as the last year of a Landon Roberts, okay, maybe you look at both of them. They've done enough homework to say, I feel comfortable with Junior Colson. Jeremiah Trotter, they haven't really done much of anything on, but they've been obviously at Clemson's Pro Day, and Mike Tomlin and Omar Khan were front and center for whatever he was able to do. Plus, I mean, you go back a couple months, Jeremiah Trotter is like considered a first-round pick. You go back a year ago, the Steelers are landing this guy in the first round of mock drafts, and he's got the NFL bloodline. That tends to help. The Steelers love NFL bloodlines. I could see him being there. I would say Junior Colson, just to mix it up, I agree with you, is a name to watch. Dwayne Carter also definitely excites me there if he's available at maybe 84. These are our realistic picks at 84 and 98, which we get, it is a jump, but you gotta squeeze everybody in here and see what you could come away with. A little bit of everything, but heavy offensive tackle in this one. Mason McCormick, offensive lineman out of South Dakota State, could play guard, could play center, could possibly play tackle. They got him lined up all over the place. The Steelers brought him in for a pre-draft visit. An interesting name to watch. Josh Newton, cornerback out of TCU. This is a slot guy. This is if you're not going to go Max Melton, if you're not going to go Andrew Phillips, maybe you're thinking Josh Newton in the third round out of TCU. Hometown kid, Matt Goncalves, offensive tackle out of Pitt, a guy that, I mean, we've talked about him more than once on this podcast, and if it wasn't for a toe injury, I believe, he would probably be higher than a third-round pick here at either 84 or 98. An interesting center out of Penn State, Hunter Norzad, who we had Nick Martin on the show on Friday, and he was a big fan of Hunter Norzad in the third round. And then Blake Fisher, offensive tackle for Notre Dame. If you're skipping offensive tackle, this might be the names to go with. Who's your favorite on this list?
Yeah, if Fisher, I honestly think Fisher's going to go a little bit higher than this, especially like before 98. But I think he would be my pick here if he's there in the third round. I think you got to go with him. The way my draft works out, like I just had to pick an offensive tackle with one of these third round picks. Needed one. So I'd say either Fisher or Goncalves are my options here, but I think I'm preferential to Fisher.
I also think I'm preferential to Fisher. I think that this dude, he played on a good offensive line, and they're just like really good offensive linemen around him that may have bumped his draft. Notre Dame just produces good offensive linemen. More times than not, their offensive linemen turn out to be at least decent in the NFL. Blake Fisher is an exciting name. I like Goncalves. I think that you could look at the hometown kid. I think that his medicals would have had to come back really, really clear for the Steelers to consider him in the third round. And people are going to obviously bring up, well, the last Pitt project didn't work out. I agree, but I think offensive linemen are a bit different. And this guy, I mean, he was projected to go a lot higher before the injury.
Yeah. I think the only problem is that Goncalves isn't necessarily known for being a tremendous athlete. So, the fact that he didn't really test, and when he did test at his pro day, it wasn't great. Like, knowing that he was kind of at 80% or whatever, he wasn't fully recovered, he still didn't really look like himself. I think that's definitely going to hurt him. And then, it's the kind of thing where he would have really shown up on tape. Like his tape, if he had played a full season, would have really helped him. But without that, it's really hard to, I think, attach yourself to Goncalves, especially because he'll need a little bit to develop.
Yeah. I don't think, maybe Fisher, but I don't think anybody you're getting in this round is instant starter in these realistic options.
Yeah.
I mean, if they're there, guys, I think every one of them walks in here with an opportunity, but these guys may have to sit them for a year. And then some fallback options. And these are some definitely interesting ones, ending with a name that I don't think many people are going to be excited about, but it could be a shot for the Steelers. Number one, wide receiver out of Florida State, Johnny Wilson. I mean, there are not many wide receivers that are 6'7" in the NFL, so you got to look at one whenever it comes about and say, maybe we consider him. Cornerback out of Missouri, Chris Abrams-Drain, an interesting name that you brought up during the process. Christian Boyd, defensive tackle out of Northern Iowa, who the Steelers brought in for a pre-draft visit, who definitely started to at least become a name within the Steelers Nation community because he was here for a top 30 visit. Dylan Johnson, running back out of Washington, was the first reported pre-draft visit for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I don't believe that ever actually happened, and that could be for a number of reasons, but it was really the first running back that the Steelers have shown interest in, and with Najee Harris entering a contract year, and we don't know what's going on with his fifth-year option, definitely a name to watch. And then to round this list off, and we might piss a lot of people off, but here it is, quarterback out of South Carolina, Spencer Rattler, who, if you ball out at the Senior Bowl, you got a shot to end up in Pittsburgh. He balled out at the Senior Bowl. He's got a shot to end up in Pittsburgh. You look at that list, who stands out to you? If you had to, this is a very all over the board list here. If you had to pick one that you thought maybe could end up in Pittsburgh, who would it be?
I'd say Johnny Wilson is the most likely, which is, kind of obvious. He's at the top of this list. But I just think, it's entirely conceivable if the Steelers go, corner or tackle or something, that it falls that they go offensive line in the second round. And then I think if that's the case, you have to pick a wide receiver in the third round. And Wilson, he's a little raw, but I think for a good reason, like you take that 6'7" frame, like 6'7" people aren't supposed to be playing wide receiver in the NFL. So
no,
I think you see an athlete like that, you see a frame like that, and you say, let's try to work with him. Let's see what we can get for the 98th overall pick in the NFL draft. We can live with that risk. So I think Johnny Wilson is the most interesting guy to me. Rattler's funny here, man. Like I don't know. I don't think it's likely, but I don't know. They need a it's just interesting, Like
the quarterback said the other day that they're not done at quarterback.
That's what I'm saying. Like it's just interesting because I don't think they are completely sold on either Fields or Wilson just yet.
I agree.
I don't think it's likely that they're using a pick on a quarterback at this point in the draft in the third round. But if Spencer Rattler falls past this, then I think it starts to get interesting. And then I think if you're the Steelers, you start to talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, you definitely have the conversations and see where those conversations take you. Spencer Rattler, maybe in the fourth round, becomes an interesting name. I'm going to hold out on my thought and my belief that the Steelers are not selecting a quarterback until maybe the sixth round, but it definitely sparked my interest. I don't know how much I'm going to take it to heart, but definitely got me at least thinking a little bit. And if you're going to go before the sixth round and talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers and just a realistic name, Spencer Rattler is the most realistic name. I think the name to watch for me on this list is Dylan Johnson. I think the Steelers might look to add another running back. I don't know how they envision Cordero Patterson. I think to have four guys in there and at least just see what happens is very interesting. And in the fourth round, you could be looking at this and saying, look, that's a guy we got for the next 4 years that's real cheap, that, we don't got to worry about Najee next season. We can move on. Maybe he's a name to watch. Maybe. And Johnny Wilson, obviously, you draft anybody who's 6'7" who isn't an offensive tackle. Very, very exciting and interesting, but that guy is as raw as it possibly gets. Either way, it's a good name to round out our Steelers 2024 NFL Draft Big Board. I hope we helped a little bit. I hope with this conversation and with these names, at least we kind of gave a layout of who the Steelers could possibly be looking at with their top three picks, because we are only a couple of days away. And at this point, it's about time to finalize who we believe the Pittsburgh Steelers will select. With that said, we're heading out of here. Now, we have some homework for everybody. Tomorrow, me and producer Nick Belsky will be on our live stream talking about everybody's mock draft. And over the next 24 hours, I want everybody to drop either in this comment in the community page on our YouTube, tweet at us, doesn't matter. Wherever you could find a spot to do it, send it to us. We want your mock draft for the Pittsburgh Steelers. We're going to go through the best ones tomorrow and talk about what ones are realistic. So make sure that you send them there. You could also send them during the live stream tomorrow, but it'll be a good time. We want to know where you're looking with the Pittsburgh Steelers. With that said, we're heading out of here. Thank you guys so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. Make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, youtube.com/All Steelers Talk. Check us out anywhere you get your podcast. Go check out our new YouTube channel, youtube.com/All Steelers Talk clips for even more All Steelers Talk. And as we say every day, enjoy another beautiful day in the Burgh. Peace.